The wrench slipped from her grease-stained fingers as the first gunshot echoed across the Marine base. Sarah Martinez didn't flinch. While every other civilian contractor dove for cover behind concrete barriers, she calmly picked up her tool and continued working on the Humvee's transmission. The Marines around her exchanged bewildered glances. Most people would be terrified by the sudden crack of rifle fire during what was supposed to be routine vehicle maintenance. Sarah just wiped her hands on her coveralls and kept working. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. "Ma'am, you need to take cover," shouted Sergeant Rodriguez from behind a supply truck. "We're under attack." Sarah looked up from the engine bay, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that seemed out of place for a mechanic. "That's coming from the training range, about 2 clicks northeast. Single shooter, probably a .308 Winchester. Training exercise." She returned to her work as if discussing the weather. The Marines stared at her in disbelief. How could a civilian contractor identify weapon types and distances with such precision? Sergeant Rodriguez lowered his rifle, confusion replacing the urgency in his voice. "How do you know that?" Sarah's hands never stopped moving as she adjusted. A bolt. Sound travels differently over open terrain. The echo pattern, the delay between shots, the specific crack of the round breaking the sound barrier. It's basic acoustics. Her explanation was matter-of-fact, delivered without looking up from her work. But there was something in the way she said it, something in her posture as she worked, that made the Marines pause. Her movements were too precise, too controlled. The way she positioned herself gave her clear sight lines to multiple exit routes. The way she kept her back to solid cover while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. These weren't the habits of someone who had spent their life under car hoods. 28-year-old Sarah Martinez had been working as a civilian mechanic on Camp Pendleton for 3 years. She arrived every morning at 06:00 sharp, carried her tools in a battered toolbox, and could repair anything with an engine. Her personnel file was straightforward. Mechanical engineering degree from a community college, 5 years of experience at various auto shops, clean background check, and excellent references. She lived in a modest apartment 20 minutes from base, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and kept to herself. The Marines knew her as the quiet woman who could fix their vehicles faster than anyone else. She never joined them for drinks after work, never talked about her personal life, and never seemed interested in the casual flirtation that sometimes came her way. She was professional, efficient, and completely unremarkable. Except for moments like this, when something in her demeanor shifted and revealed glimpses of knowledge that didn't belong in a mechanic's toolkit. Sarah had dark hair pulled back, in a practical ponytail, calloused hands that spoke of hard work, and a lean build that suggested she stayed in shape. She wore the same navy blue coveralls every day, kept her workspace meticulously organized, and had a reputation for being able to diagnose problems that stumped other mechanics. Her supervisor, a gruff former Marine named Bill Thompson, had nothing but praise for her work ethic and technical skills. What nobody knew was that Sarah's real name wasn't Sarah Martinez. It was Elena Vasquez, and 3 years ago, she had been Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper. She had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Silver Star for actions she could never discuss, and held the unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill shot in her unit's history. Her military records listed her as killed in action during a classified operation in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The truth was more complicated. Elena's final mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Her 4-person sniper team had been inserted into a remote valley to eliminate a high-value target who was coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The intelligence was solid, the target was confirmed, and the mission should have been routine. Instead, It became a nightmare that ended with Elena being the only survivor and the Marine Corps needing to make some very difficult decisions about what to do with her. The mission had been successful in the strictest sense. The target was eliminated and the immediate threat was neutralized. But Elena had been forced to take actions that went far beyond her original orders. When enemy fighters discovered her team's position, she had to make split-second decisions that saved American lives but created massive political complications. She had engaged targets that weren't on her authorized list, in locations that weren't part of her mission parameters, and in ways that could have started an international incident if they became public knowledge. The Marine Corps faced an impossible choice. Elena had acted heroically and saved lives, but acknowledging her actions would have meant admitting to operations that officially never happened. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Elena Vasquez was declared killed in action. Her body reportedly lost in a helicopter crash during extraction. The woman who had been Elena Vasquez was given a new identity, a new life, and a very clear understanding that her previous existence was permanently erased. Elena became Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic. She was given a complete background, documentation, and enough money to start over. The only condition was that she could never, under any circumstances, reveal her true identity or use her military skills in any way that might draw attention. She was to live a quiet, ordinary life and never speak of her past. The alternative was a court-martial for conduct that had never officially occurred, in a place that didn't exist, during a mission that never happened. For 3 years, Sarah had kept her word. She fixed engines, changed oil, and lived the mundane life of a civilian contractor. She suppressed the hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat zones. She ignored the tactical assessment that her mind automatically performed in every new environment. She pretended not to notice when base security was lax or when training exercises revealed operational weaknesses. She had become exactly what she was supposed to be, invisible. But old. Habits died hard. Sarah still woke up at 05:00 every morning, still maintained peak physical fitness, and still found herself unconsciously cataloging potential threats and escape routes. She couldn't help but notice things that others missed. The way morning light reflected off distant windows, the sound signatures of different vehicles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tells that indicated when someone was lying or nervous. These skills were so deeply ingrained that suppressing them required constant effort. The Marines on base had no idea they were working alongside someone who had once been among the most elite soldiers in the world. Sarah's transformation was so complete that even she sometimes wondered if Elena Vasquez had ever really existed. The woman who had once been capable of eliminating targets at distances most people couldn't even see was now concerned with compression ratios and transmission fluid. It was a different kind of precision, but precision nonetheless. Working on the base created its own challenges. Sarah was surrounded by Marines every day, watched them train, listened to them discuss tactics and operations. It was like being a professional athlete forced to watch amateur games from the sidelines. She saw mistakes in their training, inefficiencies in their equipment, and gaps in their procedures. But she kept her observations to herself, just as she had been ordered to do. The hardest part wasn't the technical aspects of her new life. Sarah had always been good with her hands and had genuinely enjoyed working with mechanical systems. The hardest part was the isolation. In the Marines, she had been part of a brotherhood, a team where everyone depended on each other for survival. As a civilian contractor, she was perpetually an outsider, someone who worked on the base but would never truly belong there. Sarah had developed her own routines to cope with the transition. She arrived early and left late, minimizing casual interactions with the Marines. She ate lunch alone, usually in her work bay while reviewing technical manuals. She volunteered for the most complex repairs, the ones that required her to work independently for hours at a time. It was a carefully constructed life designed to provide purpose while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for her cover. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years training to be invisible to enemies, and now she was using those same skills to remain invisible to allies. The difference was that in combat, invisibility was a tactical advantage. In civilian life, it was a form of prison. Sarah was free to live anywhere, work anywhere, and be anyone she wanted to be, as long as that anyone wasn't Elena Vasquez. Her apartment reflected this carefully maintained ordinariness. It was furnished with items from discount stores, decorated with generic artwork, and contained nothing that would suggest military experience. Sarah had no uniforms, no medals, no photographs from her service. She had no contact with former Marines, no subscriptions to military magazines, and no memberships in veteran organizations. Elena Vasquez had been erased so thoroughly that sometimes Sarah wondered if she had imagined her entire military career. But the skills remained. Sarah could still estimate distances by eye, still recognize the sound signatures of various weapons, and still found herself automatically assessing the tactical situation in any environment. These abilities were so fundamental to who she was that suppressing them felt like trying to forget how to breathe. She had learned to hide them, to provide plausible civilian explanations for knowledge that came from military training, but they were always there, just beneath the surface. The other mechanics respected her abilities but never questioned their source. In their world, some people had a natural talent for mechanical work, and Sarah was clearly one of them. They didn't find it strange that she could diagnose problems by sound, that she worked with methodical precision, or that she maintained her tools with obsessive care. These were the qualities of a good mechanic, and Sarah was very good at what she did. What they didn't realize was that Sarah's mechanical skills were enhanced by her military training. Her ability to work under pressure came from combat experience. Her attention to detail came from knowing that in her previous life, small mistakes could be fatal. Her physical conditioning came from years of carrying heavy equipment over long distances. Her mental discipline came from sniper training that had taught her to remain calm and focused regardless of external circumstances. Sarah's transformation from Elena to Sarah had been more than just a change of identity. It had been a complete reconstruction of her sense of self. Elena had been defined by her military service, her achievements, and her role as a Marine. Sarah was defined by her work, her solitude, and her determination to remain unremarkable. It was a profound change that went far beyond new documentation and a different job. The most challenging aspect of maintaining her cover was dealing with the Marines. Casual conversations about military operations. They discussed tactics, equipment, and experiences with the assumption that Sarah, as a civilian, wouldn't understand. The implications. She had to pretend ignorance about subjects she knew better than most of them. When they made tactical errors during training exercises, she had to bite her tongue. When they complained about equipment malfunctions she could easily fix, she had to remain silent. This constant performance was exhausting. Sarah had to remember to ask questions about things she already knew, to express civilian concerns about military operations, and to maintain the appropriate level of ignorance about classified matters. She had to be careful not to use military terminology, not to demonstrate knowledge of weapon systems, and not to reveal her understanding of tactical principles. It was like being fluent in a language but pretending to understand only a few basic words. The work itself provided some satisfaction. Sarah genuinely enjoyed the challenge of diagnosing complex mechanical problems and the satisfaction of restoring broken equipment to working order. There was something meditative about the systematic process of troubleshooting, testing, and repair. It required focus, precision, and patience, qualities that had served her well in her previous career. Her reputation as a skilled mechanic had grown over the 3 years she had been on base. Marines specifically requested her for difficult repairs, and her supervisor regularly praised her work. She had found a way to be excellent at something without drawing unwanted attention to herself. It was a delicate balance, being good enough to maintain her cover story while not being so exceptional that people started asking questions about her background. Sarah had developed a routine that helped her maintain this balance. She arrived at work early, reviewed the day's assignments, and tackled the most complex problems first. She worked methodically, documented her repairs carefully, and never took shortcuts. She was friendly but not overly social, helpful but not eager to please. She had created a persona that was competent, reliable, and utterly unremarkable. The closest she came to revealing her true nature was during equipment failures that could affect marine safety. When she discovered a brake system failure that could have caused a serious accident, she had to fight the urge to provide detailed technical explanations about failure modes and safety protocols. When she noticed that a Humvee's armor plating had been improperly installed, she had to find a way to bring it to attention without revealing her knowledge of ballistic protection systems. These moments tested her resolve and reminded her of the life she had left behind. Elena Vasquez had been trained to protect Marines, to support their mission, and to ensure their safety. Sarah Martinez was supposed to fix their vehicles and mind her own business. The conflict between these two identities was a constant source of internal tension. Sarah had learned to channel this tension into her work. She approached every repair with the same attention to detail she had once applied to preparing for combat missions. She treated every vehicle as if Marines' lives depended on its reliability, because she knew that in many cases they did. It was a way of honoring her commitment to the Corps while maintaining her cover as a civilian contractor. The transformation from Elena to Sarah had required her to suppress more than just her military skills. She had to change her posture, her way of speaking, and her approach to problem solving. Elena had been direct, confident, and accustomed to giving orders. Sarah was careful, deferential, and focused on avoiding attention. It was a fundamental change in personality that had taken months to perfect and constant vigilance to maintain. Sarah's apartment became her refuge, the only place where she could relax the constant performance of being someone else. But even there, she maintained the fiction. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet woman who worked on the base, kept regular hours, and caused no trouble. She had no visitors, no romantic relationships, and no social connections that might lead to questions about her past. The isolation was perhaps the heaviest price of her new life. Elena had been part of a tight-knit military community where relationships were based on shared experiences and mutual dependence. Sarah was an outsider everywhere, someone who could never fully connect with others because she couldn't share her true self. She had traded her identity for safety, and the cost was a loneliness that grew deeper with each passing day. But Sarah had accepted this bargain, and she was determined to honor it. She had been given a second chance at life, even if it wasn't the life she would have chosen. She had a job, a home, and the freedom to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. It was more than many people had, and more than she had any right to expect given the circumstances of her departure from the Marines, the routine of Avinov. Her days had become a form of meditation. She woke at the same time, followed the same patterns, and maintained the same level of professional competence. It was a carefully constructed life that provided stability and purpose, while protecting the secrets that could never be revealed. Sarah Martinez was living proof that it was possible to completely reinvent yourself, to become someone entirely different from who you had been. As she worked on the Humvee that morning, listening to the distant sounds of training exercises, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from the mountains of Afghanistan. 3 years ago, she had been Elena Vasquez, a Marine sniper whose skills had made her both valuable and dangerous. Today, she was Sarah Martinez, a civilian mechanic whose greatest concern was whether she had enough transmission fluid to complete her repairs. The sound of approaching footsteps broke her reverie. Sergeant Rodriguez was walking toward her work bay, his expression serious. Sarah continued working, but her awareness sharpened. In her previous life, unexpected visits from supervisors usually meant new orders or complications. As a civilian contractor, they typically meant equipment problems or scheduling changes. "Martinez," Rodriguez called out. "We need to talk." Sarah looked up from the engine bay, her expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" Rodriguez glanced around the work bay, noting the organized tools and the methodical way Sarah had disassembled the transmission. "How long have you been working on military vehicles?" It was an odd question, one that made Sarah's internal alarm systems activate. She kept her expression curious rather than concerned. "About 8 years total. 5 at civilian shops before I came here, and 3 years on base. Why?" 8 years, Rodriguez repeated, as if testing the number. "And you learned to identify weapons by sound at civilian auto shops?" Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced during combat when situations began to deteriorate. She forced herself to remain calm, to maintain her civilian persona even as her military training kicked into high gear. "My ex-boyfriend was a gun enthusiast," she said, providing the cover story she had prepared years ago. "We used to go to the range together. After a while, you start to recognize different calibers and manufacturers. It's like how mechanics can identify engine problems by sound." Rodriguez nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "Must have been quite a relationship. You identified that as a .308 Winchester from 2 kilometers away. Even experienced Marines have trouble with that kind of precision." Sarah shrugged, turning back to her work. "Sound carries differently in desert conditions. Less humidity, clearer air. And I've been listening to training exercises for 3 years. You start to recognize patterns." She was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. Everything she had said was accurate, but it wasn't the real source of her knowledge. The real source was years of military training, combat experience, and countless hours on firing ranges. She had learned to identify weapons by sound because her life had once depended on that ability. Rodriguez remained in the work bay, watching her with an intensity that suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. Sarah continued working, but she was now fully alert, processing multiple scenarios and potential responses. If her cover was blown, she would need to decide quickly whether to run or try to maintain the fiction. "Martinez," Rodriguez said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Of course. Have you ever received any military training?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the weight of 3 years of carefully constructed lies, the burden of maintaining a false identity, and the consequences of discovery. She also felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the temptation to tell the truth. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just a mechanic who pays attention to her surroundings." Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, looking for tells or signs of deception. Sarah met his gaze calmly, drawing on years of experience in maintaining cover stories under pressure. She had been interrogated by experts before, and she knew how to control her physiological responses and maintain a consistent narrative. "Okay," Rodriguez said finally. "But I want you to know that if there's anything you need to tell me, anything about your background that might be relevant to your security clearance, now would be the time." Sarah nodded. "I understand, Sergeant. But there's nothing to tell. I'm exactly who I appear to be." Rodriguez lingered for another moment, then turned to leave. "Finish up that transmission. We need that Humvee operational by 1400. "It'll be ready," Sarah replied, turning back to her work. As Rodriguez walked away, Sarah felt the familiar aftermath of a close call. Her heart rate had elevated, her awareness had sharpened, and her body had prepared for action. It was a response she recognized from combat, the physiological preparation for fight or flight that had kept her alive in hostile environments. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and she wasn't Elena Vasquez anymore. She was Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic, and she needed to get back to work on a transmission that needed to be operational by 1400. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, to push down the memories and instincts that threatened to surface. The encounter with Rodriguez had been a warning. Sarah was getting too comfortable, allowing her real knowledge to show through her civilian facade. She needed to be more careful, more conscious of how she presented herself. The price of discovery was too high to risk for the sake of demonstrating her expertise. Sarah returned to her work with renewed focus on maintaining her cover. She was Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic, and that was all she could ever be. Elena Vasquez was dead, buried in the mountains of Afghanistan along with the secrets she had carried. It was time to remember that and act accordingly. But as she worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was beginning to crack. The encounter with Rodriguez had been too close, too pointed to be casual curiosity. Someone was asking questions, and that was never a good sign for someone living under a false identity. The transmission work required her full attention, but part of her mind was already planning contingencies. Where would she go if she had to run? How quickly could she disappear? What resources did she have available if her cover was blown? These were the kinds of questions Elena Vasquez had been trained to answer, and they came naturally to her even after 3 years of civilian life. Sarah finished the transmission repair ahead of schedule, tested the vehicle systems, and completed her paperwork. The Humvee was ready for service, and she had maintained her reputation as a skilled and reliable mechanic. But the interaction with Rodriguez had changed something fundamental about her situation. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah Martinez was worried about her future. And somewhere deep inside, Elena Vasquez was preparing for the possibility that her exile might be coming to an end. The following morning brought an unexpected change to Sarah's routine. Instead of her usual assignment, working on standard vehicle maintenance, she found a different work order waiting on her desk. Emergency repair request for a damaged sniper rifle scope mount. The weapon belonged to the base's competitive marksmanship team, and their championship qualifier was scheduled for the following week. Sarah stared at the work order, feeling a familiar chill run down her spine. She hadn't touched a precision rifle in 3 years, hadn't even allowed herself to think about the weight of a stock against her shoulder, or the precise calculations required for long-distance shooting. Now the Marine Corps was asking her to repair the equipment that had once been as familiar to her as breathing. The rifle was waiting in the armory, a sleek Remington 700 in .308 caliber with a damaged Leupold scope mount. The Marine armorer, Staff Sergeant Williams, explained the problem with obvious frustration. The rifle had been dropped during transport, and the scope mount had been bent just enough to throw off the weapon's accuracy. The base's regular gunsmith was on leave, and they needed someone with precision mechanical skills to fabricate a replacement mount before the qualifier. "I know it's not your usual work," Williams said, "but Sergeant Rodriguez recommended you. Said you have an eye for detail and work well under pressure. Think you can handle it?" Sarah examined the damaged mount, her fingers automatically assessing the bend in the metal, the stress points, and the precision required for a proper repair. Every instinct she possessed screamed that this was dangerous territory, that touching this weapon would bring her too close to her former life. But refusing would raise questions she couldn't answer. "I can fabricate a replacement," she said carefully. but I'll need access to the machine shop and precise specifications for the original mount. Williams nodded enthusiastically. Whatever you need. This team has a real shot at the regional championship, and this rifle is their best weapon. Corporal Jensen shoots sub-minute of angle groups with it when the equipment's working properly. Sub-minute of angle. The term hit Sarah like a physical blow, bringing back memories of her own shooting achievements, records that would never be officially acknowledged. She had regularly shot half-minute groups at distances that would have impressed even Williams. But that was Elena's accomplishment, not Sarah's, and Sarah Martinez was supposed to know nothing about precision shooting. "I'll start on it this morning," she said, accepting the work order with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the turmoil in her mind. The machine shop was located in a separate building, away from the motor pool where Sarah usually worked. It was a precise, clean environment filled with lathes, mills, and measurement equipment that could fabricate parts to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Sarah had used similar equipment during her military service, creating custom components for specialized weapon systems that required modifications not available through standard supply channels. As she examined the damaged scope mount under a magnifying glass, Sarah's mind automatically began calculating the precise measurements needed for a replacement. The mount had to be perfectly aligned, absolutely rigid, and capable of maintaining zero even under the stress of repeated firing. It was exactly the kind of precision work that Elena Vasquez had excelled at, and Sarah Martinez was supposed to approach with the careful uncertainty of someone learning new skills. The fabrication process required several hours of careful work. Sarah had to mill the base to exact specifications, drill and tap mounting holes with perfect alignment, and finish the surface to prevent corrosion. Each step required decisions. That revealed her deep understanding of precision shooting requirements. She found herself automatically incorporating improvements to the original design, modifications that would enhance accuracy and durability. Halfway through the project, Williams returned to check on her progress. He found Sarah working with a level of precision and confidence that seemed inconsistent with someone who had supposedly never worked on firearms before. She was using measurement tools with the casual expertise of someone who understood their capabilities intimately, and her work showed a level of craftsmanship that exceeded what he had expected. "You've done this kind of work before," Williams observed, watching Sarah make minute adjustments to the milling machine. Sarah looked up from her work, maintaining her cover story even as her hands continued the familiar motions. Precision. Machining is precision machining. Whether it's engine components or rifle parts, the principles are the same. Tight tolerances, proper surface finish, careful measurement. Williams nodded, but his expression remained curious. "Still, you seem to know exactly what you're doing. Most mechanics would need a lot more guidance working on weapon systems." "I'm good at following specifications," Sarah replied, gesturing to the technical drawings spread across her workbench. "The requirements are all clearly documented." What Williams couldn't see was that Sarah was working primarily from memory, using the technical drawings only to verify dimensions she already knew. She had fabricated dozens of similar mounts during her military service, often under field conditions with improvised equipment. The machine shop at Camp Pendleton was luxury compared to some of the environments where she had performed similar work. As the day progressed, word of Sarah's project spread through the base. The marksmanship team was well regarded, and their upcoming qualifier was generating significant interest. Several Marines stopped by the machine shop to check on the progress, and each visit brought new questions about Sarah's background and experience. Corporal Jensen, the primary shooter who would be using the repaired rifle, arrived in the afternoon to inspect Sarah's work. He was a young Marine with the intense focus that Sarah recognized from her own sniper training. He examined the new scope mount with the critical eye of someone whose performance depended on equipment reliability. "This is beautiful work, Jensen. said, running his finger along the precisely machined surface. Better than the original factory mount. Where did you learn to machine to these tolerances? Sarah felt the familiar tension of maintaining her cover under expert scrutiny. Jensen knew precision equipment, and his questions would be more technically sophisticated than anything she had faced before. She needed to provide answers that satisfied his curiosity without revealing her true expertise. I did some work for a custom motorcycle shop before I came here, she said, sticking to the mechanical background in her cover story. Racing bikes require pretty tight tolerances too. Same principles, different application. Jensen nodded, but continued his examination with obvious interest. The surface finish is incredible. And these mounting holes are perfectly aligned. You sure you haven't worked on rifles before? First time, Sarah replied, forcing herself to sound pleased with the compliment rather than matter-of-fact about work she considered routine. Jensen picked up the rifle and began installing the new mount, his movements showing the careful precision of someone who understood the importance of proper setup. Sarah watched him work, noting his technique and automatically assessing his skill level. He was good, but not exceptional. Certainly competent enough to benefit from properly functioning equipment, but lacking the instinctive understanding that separated good shooters from great ones. Mind if I ask you something? Jensen said as he tightened the mount screws to proper torque specifications. Sarah felt her internal alarms activate, but maintained her expression of casual interest. Sure. How do you know the exact torque specification for these screws? I didn't see you look it up anywhere. The question caught Sarah off guard. She had automatically applied the correct torque based on years of experience, without conscious thought about how Sarah Martinez would know that information. It was exactly the kind of slip that could unravel her carefully maintained cover. Lucky guess, she said, forcing a smile. I tend to remember specifications once I've worked with them. Jensen finished installing the mount and stepped back to examine his work. We'll need to zero this tomorrow morning before the qualifier. Want to come watch? See how your work performs under actual shooting conditions? The invitation was casual, but Sarah recognized the undertone. Jensen was curious about her, interested in her reaction to seeing the rifle fired. It was the kind of innocent request that could lead to exposure if she wasn't careful. I'd like to, but I have a full schedule tomorrow, Sarah replied. Maybe you can let me know how it shoots. Jensen nodded, but his expression suggested he had noted her reluctance. Sure thing. I'll stop by after the range session and give you a report. After Jensen left with the repaired rifle, Sarah remained in the machine shop to clean up her work area and complete the documentation for the repair. But her mind was processing the implications of the day's events. Working on the rifle had brought her too close to her former life, revealed too much of her real knowledge, and attracted too much attention from people who might ask the right questions. The smart thing would be to request reassignment back to vehicle maintenance to avoid any future involvement with weapons or shooting sports. But that kind of avoidance might be equally suspicious. Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic, would be proud of her successful completion of a challenging technical project. Elena Vasquez, former Marine sniper, understood that any deviation from normal behavior could trigger investigation. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment with a sense of unease that reminded her of the hypervigilance she had experienced in combat zones. She had spent the day surrounded by familiar equipment, using skills she had been forced to suppress, and interacting with Marines who shared her passion for precision and excellence. It had been simultaneously satisfying and terrifying. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, confining in a way that made her want to pace or find some physical outlet for her nervous energy. Sarah forced herself to follow her normal routine, preparing dinner and settling down with a technical manual to maintain her cover story of continuous learning. But her mind kept returning to the feel of the rifle in her hands, the satisfaction of creating something with perfect precision, and the dangerous pleasure of being around people who understood the technical challenges she faced. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jensen arrived at the motor pool before Sarah's shift officially started, his expression a mixture of excitement and confusion. The rifle had performed flawlessly during the zero session, producing groups that exceeded even his best previous performance. But something about the experience had raised questions that he couldn't ignore. "I need to talk to you about yesterday's work," Jensen said without preamble. Sarah looked up from her morning equipment check, noting the intensity in his voice. "Problem with the mount?" "No problem. That's the issue. The rifle is shooting better than it ever has. Half-minute groups at 300 yards, consistent velocity, 0 point of impact shift. It's performing like a custom precision rifle, not a standard military weapon." Sarah maintained her expression of professional satisfaction while internally recognizing the problem. She had unconsciously applied modifications and improvements that went beyond simple repair, creating a scope mount that enhanced the rifle's performance beyond its original specifications. It was exactly the kind of enhancement that Elena Vasquez would have made, and that Sarah Martinez shouldn't have known how to create. "Sometimes everything just comes together," she said carefully. "Good shooter, properly maintained rifle, quality. Optics, stable mount. The fundamentals are all there." Jensen studied her face with the intensity of someone trained to observe and evaluate. "The thing is, I've been shooting competitively for 5 years. I know my equipment and my capabilities. This rifle is performing at a level that shouldn't be possible with a standard factory mount, even a perfectly fabricated one." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of a tactical situation deteriorating, the moment when careful planning began to unravel due to unforeseen complications. Jensen wasn't just curious anymore. He was suspicious, and his questions were becoming more focused and technical. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, buying time to formulate a response. "I'm suggesting that scope mount incorporates design modifications that go beyond the original specifications. Stress relief cuts, harmonic dampening, bedding improvements. Modifications that require expertise in precision rifle systems, not just general machining skills." The accusation hung between them, polite in its phrasing but clear in its implications. Jensen had recognized work that exceeded Sarah's supposed qualifications, and he wasn't going to be satisfied with casual explanations about lucky guesses and transferable skills. Sarah felt a moment of pride despite the danger. Jensen was right. She had unconsciously incorporated improvements that represented years of experience with precision rifle systems. The mount she had created was better than the original because she had understood not just how to fabricate it, but how to optimize it for maximum performance. It was the difference between a mechanic following specifications and an expert improving upon them. "I researched the project pretty thoroughly," Sarah said, falling back on her cover story. "Found some technical articles about competition rifle modifications. Figured if I was going to do the work, I might as well do it right." Jensen nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "These modifications require understanding of harmonic frequencies, barrel harmonics, and recoil management. Pretty advanced stuff for someone who's never worked on rifles before." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been watching their interaction from across the motor pool. His expression suggested that the conversation he had witnessed was adding to concerns he already harbored about Sarah's background. "Problem here?" Rodriguez asked, his tone neutral but alert. Jensen looked between Sarah and Rodriguez, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Just discussing the rifle repair. Outstanding work, really. Almost too good to believe." Rodriguez's expression sharpened at the emphasis Jensen placed on his words. "Too good how?" "The rifle is performing at levels that exceed factory specifications. Whoever did this work understands precision rifle systems at an expert level. Sarah felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. Two Marines were now openly discussing their suspicions about her qualifications, and their questions were becoming more direct and harder to deflect. She needed to find a way to defuse the situation without revealing information that would confirm their growing suspicions. "I'll take that as a compliment," Sarah said, forcing lightness into her voice. "Though I should probably get back to my regular work. Got 3 Humvees waiting for transmission service." But Rodriguez stepped forward, blocking her path. "Actually, Martinez, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about your background. My office, 10 minutes. Sarah nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor even as her mind raced through potential responses and escape routes. The moment she had been dreading for 3 years had finally arrived. Her carefully constructed cover was unraveling, and she would soon be forced to make decisions that could change everything. As she walked toward Rodriguez's office, Sarah felt the familiar weight of impending crisis. Alina Vasquez had been trained to handle interrogation, to maintain cover stories under pressure, and to make quick decisions in dangerous situations. Sarah Martinez was supposed to be a civilian mechanic who had no experience with such challenges. The conflict between these two identities was about to reach a breaking point. Rodriguez's office was small and functional, containing a desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets filled with personnel records and administrative documents. Sarah had been in the office before for routine paperwork and performance reviews, but this felt different. The atmosphere was formal, almost interrogative, and Rodriguez's body language suggested he was prepared for a difficult conversation. "Sit down, Martinez," Rodriguez said, settling behind his desk with a folder that Sarah assumed contained her personnel file. Sarah took the offered chair, maintaining the posture and demeanor of someone who was curious but not concerned about the meeting. Internally, she was assessing the room's layout, noting potential exits, and evaluating Rodriguez's likely approach to the conversation. "I've been reviewing your work history," Rodriguez began, opening the folder and scanning its contents. 3 years on base, excellent performance reviews, no disciplinary issues. Supervisor consistently rates you as one of the best mechanics in the pool. Sarah waited, recognizing the setup for a more pointed line of questioning. Rodriguez was establishing her positive record before introducing the concerns that had prompted this meeting. "But I've also been getting some interesting reports about your capabilities. Yesterday's rifle repair, your ability to identify weapons by sound, your knowledge of technical specifications that aren't typically part of civilian mechanical training." Rodriguez paused, studying Sarah's face for reactions. She maintained her expression of professional attention, drawing on years of experience in maintaining cover during hostile interrogation. "I'm good at my job," Sarah said simply. "I take pride in learning whatever I need to know to complete assignments properly." "Learning from where?" Rodriguez asked. "The rifle modifications you made require expertise that takes years to develop." Jensen showed the mount to our base gunsmith, who confirmed that the work incorporates advanced precision rifle techniques. Sarah felt a momentary flash of annoyance at Jensen's decision to seek expert evaluation of her work, but she suppressed the reaction immediately. Of course he would want professional confirmation of his assessment. She would have done the same thing in his position. "I spent a lot of time researching the project," she repeated. "Internet articles, technical forums, manufacturer specifications. When you have the right tools and take enough time, you can achieve pretty good results." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting that he wasn't satisfied with her explanation. "Martinez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you ever received any military training in any capacity with any organization?" The question was the one Sarah had been expecting and dreading. It was direct, specific, and designed to elicit information that would either confirm or dispel Rodriguez's suspicions. Her answer would determine whether her cover remained intact or whether she would be forced to make much more difficult decisions about her future. Sarah met Rodriguez's gaze directly, drawing on every technique she had learned about maintaining cover stories under pressure. The key was to remain calm, consistent, and believable while providing an answer that satisfied the questioner's immediate concerns. "No," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I've never received any military training. I'm a civilian mechanic who's good at learning new skills and applying them carefully." Rodriguez studied her face for several seconds, looking for micro-expressions or physiological indicators that might suggest deception. Sarah controlled her breathing, maintained appropriate eye contact, and kept her posture relaxed but attentive. "Okay," Rodriguez said finally. "But I want you to understand that if I discover any discrepancies in your background information, any undisclosed military service or training, it will result in immediate termination and potential criminal charges for falsifying federal employment documents." Sarah nodded. "I understand completely. You won't find any discrepancies because there aren't any." Rodriguez closed the folder and leaned forward. "One more thing. I'm recommending you for a more thorough background investigation. Standard procedure when questions arise about contractor qualifications. Nothing personal, just due diligence." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her reaction internal. A thorough background investigation would involve federal agencies, detailed records checks, and potentially interviews with people from her supposed past. Her cover identity had been expertly constructed, but it wasn't designed to withstand the kind of scrutiny that a determined investigation could bring to bear. "That's fine," Sarah said, maintaining her calm demeanor. "I have nothing to hide." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah's mind was already shifting into contingency planning mode. A thorough background investigation would likely expose the fictional nature of her identity within weeks, possibly days. She would need to decide quickly whether to run, attempt to maintain the deception, or find some other solution to the crisis that was rapidly developing. Rodriguez stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You can return to your regular duties. The investigation will take some time, and there's no reason to disrupt your work schedule while we wait for results." Sarah rose and headed for the door, but Rodriguez's voice stopped her before she could leave. "Martinez, one last thing. If there's anything you want to tell me, anything that might come out during the investigation, now would be the time. Once the formal process starts, I won't have much flexibility in how I handle whatever we discover." Sarah turned back to face him, recognizing both the threat and the opportunity in his words. Rodriguez was giving her a chance to come clean, to reveal information on her own terms rather than having it discovered through investigation. It was exactly the kind of opening that Elena Vasquez had been trained to recognize and evaluate. "There's nothing to tell," Sarah said. "I'm exactly who I appear to be." Rodriguez nodded, but his expression suggested he expected to hear from her again before the investigation was complete. Sarah left his office with the uncomfortable knowledge that her time as Sarah Martinez was likely coming to an end. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine maintenance work and careful observation of the Marines around her. Sarah noted which personnel seemed to be watching her more closely, which conversations stopped when she approached, and which of her colleagues were asking more questions than usual about her background and experience. By evening, Sarah had reached a conclusion that she had been avoiding for 3 years. Her cover was blown, not definitively, but sufficiently to trigger an investigation that would expose her true identity. She had perhaps a week, maybe 2, before federal investigators began asking questions that her fictional background couldn't answer. Elena Vasquez had been trained for this contingency. Every deep cover operation included extraction protocols and emergency procedures for situations where operatives were compromised. But Sarah Martinez wasn't supposed to know those procedures, and Elena Vasquez was officially dead. Sarah spent the evening in her apartment, reviewing her options with the methodical approach she had once applied to mission planning. She could run, disappearing before the investigation revealed her true identity. She could attempt to maintain her cover, hoping that her documentation would withstand scrutiny. Or she could find a way to control the situation, to reveal information selectively and on her own terms. Each option carried significant risks and uncertain outcomes. Running would mean abandoning the life she had built and starting over again, with even less support than she had received 3 years ago. Maintaining her cover was almost certainly doomed to failure given the level of scrutiny she was now facing. But revealing her identity voluntarily carried the risk of consequences. That might be worse than discovery. As Sarah prepared for what might be her last night as a civilian mechanic, she reflected on the choices that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had traded her identity for safety and the chance at a normal life. Tomorrow she might be forced to make that trade again, but this time she would be negotiating from a position of weakness rather than strength. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked at the caller ID and felt her pulse quicken. The number belonged to Jensen, and calls after normal duty hours usually meant either emergencies or personal interest. Given the day's events, Sarah suspected it wasn't a social call. "Hello," she answered, keeping her voice neutral. "Sarah, it's Jensen. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" Jensen paused, and Sarah could hear tension in his voice when he continued. "I wanted to apologize for this morning. I think I may have caused problems for you by talking to Rodriguez about the rifle work." Sarah felt a mixture of surprise and appreciation for his concern. "You were just being thorough. Nothing wrong with that." "Maybe, but I got the impression that my question started something you weren't expecting." "Look, I know we don't know each other well, but if you're in some kind of trouble, I want you to know that you've got people here who respect your work." The offer of support was unexpected and touching, but also dangerous. Jensen was clearly suspicious about her background, but he was also offering to help if she was facing difficulties. It was exactly the kind of complication that made cover operations so challenging. "I appreciate that," Sarah said carefully. "But I'm not in any trouble. Just doing my job and trying to stay out of the way." Jensen was quiet for a moment, then spoke with obvious reluctance. "Sarah, I've been thinking about that scope mount all day. The work you did was exceptional, beyond what I would expect from someone with your stated background. If you've got military experience that you haven't disclosed, that's your business. But if you're hiding something because you think it would cause problems, you should know that most of us would consider military service a positive qualification." The comment revealed more than Jensen probably intended. He had moved beyond suspicion to a degree of certainty about her background, and he was offering her an opportunity to confirm his assessment without facing negative consequences. It was a generous gesture from someone who barely knew her. "I don't have any military experience," Sarah said, maintaining her cover story even as she appreciated Jensen's attempts to help. "Okay," Jensen replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe her. "Just remember that offer of support. Whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone." After ending the call, Sarah sat in her apartment contemplating the unexpected complexity of her situation. Rodriguez was suspicious and had initiated an investigation that would likely expose her identity. Jensen was also suspicious but was offering support rather than threatening consequences. Both men were responding to the same evidence, but their conclusions about how to handle the situation were dramatically different. Sarah realized that she was facing a choice she hadn't anticipated. She could continue to maintain her cover and hope for the best, knowing that discovery would likely mean serious consequences. Or she could trust Jensen's assessment of how the Marines would react to learning about her military background and find a way to reveal her identity on her own terms. The decision would determine not just her immediate future, but the kind of person she chose to be. Elena Vasquez had been a Marine who put the safety of others ahead of her own concerns. Sarah Martinez was a civilian who prioritized personal security and maintaining her cover. The conflict between these two identities was about to force a resolution that would define who she really was. As Sarah prepared for bed, she made a decision that surprised her. Tomorrow she would take action to control the situation rather than simply reacting to events as they developed. She wasn't sure exactly what form that action would take, but she was tired of living in fear of discovery. It was time to stop running from Elena Vasquez and find a way to integrate both parts of her identity. The last thing Sarah saw before falling asleep was her reflection in the bedroom mirror. For the first time in 3 years, she looked like someone who was preparing for action rather than someone who was hiding from her past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to determine her own fate. The emergency alarm shattered the morning quiet at 0547 hours. Sarah was already in the motor pool, having arrived early to avoid the growing attention her presence seemed to attract. The base-wide announcement crackled through speakers with urgent authority. Active shooter situation at the main gate. All personnel to shelter in place immediately. Sarah's civilian instincts told her to follow protocol, to find secure cover and wait for the all-clear signal. But Elena Vasquez's training kicked in automatically, analyzing the situation with tactical precision. The sound pattern of gunfire echoing across the base suggested a single shooter with a semi-automatic rifle, positioned approximately 800 meters from her current location. The shooting was sporadic, not the sustained fire of someone engaged in active combat, which meant the shooter was likely selecting targets deliberately. Marines throughout the motor pool were taking defensive positions following their training. For base security emergencies, Sarah watched Sergeant Rodriguez coordinate the response from behind an armored Humvee, speaking rapidly into his radio while gesturing for personnel to maintain cover. The professional part of her mind noted that their positioning was adequate for protection against small arms fire, but their lack of offensive capability meant they were essentially pinned down until the base's quick reaction force could respond. Through the motor pool's windows, Sarah could see the main gate area where smoke was beginning to rise. The shooter had apparently targeted several vehicles, possibly including fuel tanks, creating both immediate danger and potential for escalation. The base's sniper team would be deploying to counter the threat, but their response time from the mine armory to effective firing positions would be at least 10 minutes under optimal conditions. Jensen appeared at Sarah's position, moving in a low crouch to avoid presenting a target to the distant shooter. His face was grim with the intensity of someone trained to respond to such situations, but currently limited to defensive action. "Sarah, we need to get you to a more secure location. Civilians aren't supposed to be exposed to this kind of situation." Sarah's response was automatic, spoken before she could consider the implications. Single shooter, semi-automatic, probably. 223 or 5:56. He's targeting vehicles and infrastructure, not personnel. Range is approximately 800 meters. Based on the sound delay and echo pattern. Jensen stared at her, his expression shifting from concern to intense scrutiny. "How do you know all that?" The question hung in the air as another volley of shots echoed across the base. Sarah realized she had just demonstrated knowledge that no civilian mechanic should possess, tactical analysis that required military training and combat experience. Her cover story had no explanation for the kind of rapid threat assessment she had just provided. Before she could formulate a response, Rodriguez's voice cut through the motor pool with sharp urgency. "We've got a problem. Base sniper team is delayed by mechanical issues with their vehicle. Shooters got clear lines of sight to the main approach routes, and our quick reaction force can't advance without taking casualties." Sarah felt the familiar weight of critical decision-making that had defined her military career. Lives were in danger, Marines were being prevented from responding effectively, and she possessed skills that could resolve the situation. But using those skills would irrevocably destroy her civilian identity and expose her to consequences she had spent 3 years avoiding. The sound of shattering glass indicated that the shooter had expanded his target selection to include buildings. Sarah's tactical analysis suggested that he was systematically eliminating the base's ability to respond effectively, targeting communication equipment, vehicles, and infrastructure. It was the kind of methodical approach that indicated either military training or extensive planning. Rodriguez appeared beside Jensen, his expression tight with frustration. "Martinez, I need you to move to the emergency shelter with the other civilian contractors. This area is too exposed." Sarah looked at Rodriguez, then at Jensen, weighing the consequences of her next words against the potential cost of continued inaction. Through the window, she could see smoke rising from multiple locations near the main gate. The shooter was achieving his objectives while the base's defenders remained effectively neutralized by their inability to close with him safely. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice carrying that tone of authority that she hadn't used in 3 years. "I can stop him." Rodriguez's expression shifted from confusion to sharp attention. "What did you say?" "I can eliminate the shooter. But you need to understand what that means before I act." Jensen moved closer, his face reflecting the dawning realization that his suspicions about Sarah's background were about to be confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Sarah made her decision, accepting the consequences that would follow. "My name isn't Sarah Martinez. I'm Elena Vasquez, former Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper. I was declared killed in action 3 years ago during a classified operation, and I've been living under false identity since then." The silence that followed her revelation was broken only by the distant sound of gunfire. Rodriguez and Jensen stared at her, processing the implications of what she had just confessed. Sarah could see the rapid mental calculations taking place as they considered her claims against their observations of her knowledge and capabilities. "That's impossible," Rodriguez said slowly. "Your background check, your employment records, your entire identity has been verified. My background was constructed by military intelligence to provide cover for an operation that went wrong. Elena Vasquez officially died in Afghanistan, but I survived and was given a new identity to protect classified information." Sarah's voice was calm, factual, delivering information she had never spoken aloud to anyone. Another explosion echoed from the direction of the main gate, larger than the previous gunfire. The shooter had apparently moved to more destructive weapons or found a fuel source to target. Time was running out for effective response, and Sarah could see the growing urgency in Rodriguez's expression. "Prove it," Rodriguez demanded. "If you're really a Marine sniper, prove it." Sarah gestured toward the rifle rack where the base's emergency weapons were stored. "Give me that M40A3 and 5 rounds. I'll put him down from here." Jensen looked between Sarah and the weapon she had indicated, his expression reflecting the magnitude of what she was proposing. "That's an 800-meter shot through multiple obstacles and variable wind conditions. Even our best snipers would have trouble making that shot." "I've made harder shots under worse conditions," Sarah replied, moving toward the rifle rack with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Rodriguez hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of arming a civilian contractor against the potential benefits of neutralizing the threat. Another burst of gunfire from the main gate decided the matter. He unlocked the rifle rack and handed Sarah the M40A3 along with a magazine of ammunition. Sarah accepted the weapon with hands that remembered its weight and balance perfectly. The familiar feel of the stock against her shoulder brought back 3 years of suppressed muscle memory and training. She cycled the bolt action smoothly, checking the weapon's condition with the automatic motions of someone who had performed the same actions thousands of times. I need access to an elevated position with clear lines of sight to the main gate," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone accustomed to giving tactical directions under pressure. Jensen pointed toward a maintenance ladder that led to the motor pool's roof. "That'll give you the best angle, but it's also the most exposed position. If you miss, he'll know exactly where you are." Sarah was already moving toward the ladder, her mind automatically calculating wind speed, range estimation, and target acquisition procedures. "I won't miss." Rodriguez followed her to the base of the ladder, his expression reflecting the surreal nature of the situation. "Vasquez, if that's really your name, I need you to understand that this changes everything. If you do this, there's no going back to being Sarah Martinez." Sarah paused at the bottom of the ladder, looking back at Rodriguez with eyes that reflected years of making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah Martinez was never real. She was just someone I pretended to be because I was ordered to disappear. But Elena Vasquez is still a Marine, and Marines don't let their brothers die when they can prevent it. She climbed the ladder quickly, emerging onto the roof with the rifle carried in a low ready position. The motor pool's roof provided an excellent vantage point overlooking the base's main approaches, and Sarah could immediately identify the shooter's position based on muzzle flashes and the pattern of damage visible near the main gate. The target was positioned behind a concrete barrier approximately 750 meters from her location. He had good cover and concealment, which explained why the base's defenders had been unable to engage him effectively. But he had also positioned himself in a location that provided Sarah with a clear shot through a gap in his defensive position. Sarah settled into a prone firing position, using the roof's edge as a stable shooting platform. Her movements were automatic, drawing on years of training and combat experience that had been suppressed but never forgotten. She adjusted the rifle's scope for range and wind conditions, estimating the environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory. Through the scope, Sarah could see the shooter clearly for the first time. He was wearing civilian clothing and appeared to be acting alone, but his tactical positioning and weapon handling suggested military training. She could see that he was systematically targeting specific infrastructure elements, following a plan designed to maximize disruption to the base's response capabilities. Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into the meditative state that had made her one of the most effective snipers in her unit. The familiar routine of preparation, calculation, and execution felt like returning home after a long absence. This was who she really was, who she had always been beneath the carefully constructed facade of civilian normalcy. The wind conditions were challenging but manageable, requiring approximately 2 minutes of angle adjustment to compensate for the crosswind effect on bullet trajectory. Sarah made the necessary scope adjustments and settled into her final firing position, placing the crosshairs on the target with surgical precision. From her elevated position, Sarah could see Marines beginning to move toward the main gate under cover, but their advance was being disrupted by continued fire from the shooters. Position. Several personnel were pinned down behind vehicles, unable to advance or retreat safely. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and immediate action was required to prevent casualties. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure she had been trained to maintain regardless of external circumstances. The rifle's crosshairs settled on the target's center mass, accounting for his position behind partial cover and the ballistic factors affecting bullet flight at this range. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil driving the stock into Sarah's shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed, striking the target and immediately ending his ability to continue the attack. The gunfire from the main gate stopped abruptly, replaced by the sounds of Marines advancing to secure the area. Sarah remained in position for several seconds, observing the target area to confirm that the threat had been eliminated and that no additional shooters were present. The tactical situation had changed dramatically, with base security forces now able to respond effectively without fear of sniper fire from the previously dominant position. Jensen's voice reached her from the base of the ladder, calling up with obvious relief and amazement. That was incredible. One shot, 750 meters. Perfect center mass hit. I've never seen shooting like that. Sarah climbed down from the roof, carrying the rifle with the same casual competence she had displayed while ascending. But her expression reflected the weight of what had just occurred. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, revealing her true identity and capabilities in the most public way possible. Rodriguez was waiting at the bottom of the ladder, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. Outstanding work, Vasquez. That was textbook precision shooting under pressure. But now we need to talk about what happens next. Sarah handed him the rifle, noting that her hands remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of the decisions she had just made. I understand the implications, Sergeant. I've blown my cover completely, and there will be consequences. Before Rodriguez could respond, the motor pool was filled with Marines returning from the main gate area. Word of the sniper shot had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see the civilian mechanic, who had just demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded anything they had witnessed during their own training. Staff Sergeant Williams approached with obvious amazement. Martinez, or whoever you really are, that was the most impressive shot I've seen in 20 years of military service. How did you learn to shoot like that? Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, recognizing that her secret was now public knowledge among the Marines who had witnessed her actions. There was no possibility of returning to her previous anonymity, no way to claim that her success had been luck or beginner's fortune. I learned to shoot like that because I'm a United States Marine, Sarah said, her voice carrying the pride and authority that she had suppressed for 3 years. I was trained as a scout sniper, deployed in combat operations, and dedicated my life to protecting Marines like all of you. The revelation created a buzz of conversation among the assembled personnel. Sarah could see the rapid processing taking place as Marines connected her demonstrated capabilities with their previous observations of her knowledge and behavior. Everything that had seemed inconsistent about Sarah Martinez now made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of her true identity. Corporal Jensen stepped forward, his expression reflecting vindication mixed with concern. I knew there was something different about you. The way you worked on that rifle mount, your knowledge of weapon systems, your reaction to tactical situations. But why hide it? Why pretend to be a civilian? Sarah met his gaze directly, recognizing that she owed these Marines an explanation for the deception she had maintained while working among them. Because Elena Vasquez was declared killed in action to protect classified information, I was ordered to assume a new identity and never reveal my military background under any circumstances. Rodriguez nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that he understood the implications of Sarah's revelation. Black operations need to know compartmentalization, political complications. Someone decided it was easier to erase you than deal with whatever happened during your final mission. That's exactly what happened, Sarah confirmed. I was given a choice between disappearing or facing charges for actions that officially never occurred. I chose to disappear. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the base commander, Colonel Patterson, who had been coordinating the response to the emergency. His expression was grim as he approached the group, but Sarah could see relief in his eyes at the successful resolution of the crisis. I understand we have a civilian contractor who eliminated the shooter with a single rifle shot, Patterson said, his tone suggesting he was still processing the unusual nature of the situation. Rodriguez stepped forward to provide the explanation. Sir, this is Elena Vasquez, former Marine Corps scout sniper, who has been working under false identity as a civilian mechanic. She's the one who neutralized the threat. Patterson studied Sarah with the intense attention of someone evaluating an unexpected tactical asset. Vasquez, your shot saved lives today and prevented what could have been a much more serious situation. But your presence here under false identity raises questions that need to be addressed immediately. Sarah nodded, understanding that the consequences of her revelation were just beginning. I understand, sir. I'm prepared to answer any questions about my background and my actions. Patterson gestured toward the base headquarters building. We'll continue this conversation in a more secure environment. Rodriguez, Jensen, Williams, I want you present as witnesses to today's events. As the group moved toward the headquarters building, Sarah reflected on the dramatic change in her circumstances. 3 hours ago, she had been Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic trying to avoid attention while maintaining her cover identity. Now she was Elena Vasquez, Marine sniper whose actions had saved lives and exposed secrets that had been buried for 3 years. The base headquarters conference room was austere and functional, containing a large table surrounded by chairs and walls lined with maps and operational charts. Sarah took a seat across from Colonel Patterson, flanked by Rodriguez and Jensen, while Williams positioned himself near the door. The formal arrangement suggested that this would be more than a casual debriefing. Patterson opened a folder containing documents that Sarah recognized as her fraudulent personnel file and employment records. According to your official documentation, you're Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic with no military experience. But according to the Marines who witnessed your actions today, you demonstrated capabilities that suggest extensive military training. Sarah met Patterson's gaze directly, drawing on her military bearing and training to present herself as the Marine she had always been. Sir, my name is Elena Vasquez, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. I served as a scout sniper with classified units and was declared killed in action following a mission in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with obvious interest. Declared killed in action, but obviously still alive. That suggests your final mission involved complications that required creative solutions from higher headquarters. Yes, sir. I was given a choice between accepting a new identity and disappearing permanently, or facing court-martial for actions that had created political complications. I chose to disappear. Patterson nodded, his expression suggesting he understood the kind of situations that led to such drastic measures. And you've been living as Sarah Martinez for 3 years, working as a civilian contractor while maintaining operational security about your true background. That's correct, sir. Until today, when I determined that the tactical situation required me to break cover and engage the threat. Patterson made notes in the folder, documenting Sarah's statements for what she assumed would be a more extensive investigation. Your decision to engage was operationally sound, but it has created a situation that requires careful handling. You've exposed classified information, revealed your continued existence to unauthorized personnel, and demonstrated capabilities that contradict your official status. Sarah understood the implications of Patterson's words. Her actions had been necessary and successful, but they had also violated the terms of her agreement to remain hidden. She was now in violation of direct orders that had been given 3 years ago, regardless of the circumstances that had prompted her to act. Sir, I understand that my actions today have consequences, but Marines were in danger, and I had the capability to eliminate the threat. I couldn't stand by and let people die when I could prevent it. Patterson's expression softened slightly, reflecting appreciation for Sarah's commitment to Marine values despite her compromised status. Your actions today were exemplary, Vasquez. You saved lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation. But now we need to determine how to handle your continued existence and your exposed identity. Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression suggesting he wanted to contribute to the discussion. Sir, if I may, Vasquez has been an outstanding employee for 3 years. Her work quality, professionalism, and reliability have been exceptional. Today's actions just confirmed capabilities that we had already begun to suspect. Jensen nodded. In agreement. Sir, her knowledge and skills have been evident in her work, even when she was trying to hide them. The rifle repair she completed this week demonstrated expertise that exceeded normal civilian qualifications. Patterson looked between Rodriguez and Jensen, noting their support for Sarah despite the deception she had maintained. Are you suggesting that her true identity should be acknowledged and her military status restored? Rodriguez and Jensen exchanged glances before Rodriguez responded. Sir, we're suggesting that Elena Vasquez has proven herself to be exactly the kind of Marine we want serving with us. Her skills, dedication, and commitment to protecting others are exceptional. Patterson turned back to Sarah, his expression reflecting the complexity of the decision he was facing. Vasquez, if we were to consider restoring your military status and acknowledging your continued existence, would you be willing to accept the consequences and responsibilities that would entail? Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she hadn't experienced since her final mission 3 years ago. The possibility of returning to her true identity, of being acknowledged as the Marine she had always been, was something she had never allowed herself to hope for. Sir, I would be honored to serve as a Marine again. It's who I am, who I've always been, even when I was pretending to be someone else. Patterson made additional notes in the folder, then looked up with an expression that suggested he had reached a preliminary decision. Vasquez, I'm going to recommend that your case be reviewed by higher headquarters with consideration for restoring your military status. Your actions today, combined with your exemplary service record and the support of the Marines who have worked with you, suggest that the decision to erase your identity may have been premature. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at Patterson's words. The possibility of returning to military service was everything she had hoped for, but she also understood that the review process would involve intense scrutiny and potential complications from the classified circumstances that had led to her original disappearance. Thank you, sir. I understand that the process will be complex, and I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation or review. Patterson closed the folder and stood up, signaling the end of the formal portion of the meeting. Vasquez, until we receive guidance from higher headquarters, you'll continue working on base but with acknowledgement of your true identity. Your security clearance will need to be reviewed, and your access to classified information will be limited until that process is complete. Sarah stood and came to attention, offering Patterson the first military salute she had given in 3 years. Understood, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve again. Patterson returned the salute with obvious respect. Vasquez, Marines like you are the reason this corps maintains its reputation for excellence. Your actions today reminded everyone present what it means to be a Marine, regardless of what uniform you're wearing. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to leave the conference room, Jensen approached Sarah with an expression of genuine admiration. Elena, I want you to know that having you as part of our team, in whatever capacity, makes all of us better Marines. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of belonging that she hadn't experienced since her supposed death 3 years ago. Thank you, Jensen. And thank you for offering support when you suspected I was hiding something. That meant more than you know. Rodriguez also approached, extending his hand in a gesture of respect and acceptance. Vasquez, I owe you an apology for suspecting you were hiding something problematic. Turns out you were hiding something extraordinary. Sarah shook his hand, appreciating the acknowledgement and acceptance from someone who had been instrumental in exposing her true identity. You were doing your job, Sergeant Rodriguez. Good leaders ask questions when things don't add up. As Sarah left the headquarters building, she reflected on the dramatic transformation her life had undergone in a single day. This morning, she had been Sarah Martinez, civilian mechanic living in fear of discovery. Tonight, she was Elena Vasquez, acknowledged Marine whose skills and dedication had been recognized and valued by her colleagues. The base around her looked the same, but everything had changed. Sarah was no longer hiding her knowledge, suppressing her instincts, or pretending to be someone she wasn't. She could walk among Marines as one of them, could contribute her skills and experience without fear of exposure, and could finally integrate the two parts of her identity that had been in conflict for 3 years. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment with a sense of anticipation rather than the quiet resignation that had characterized her previous routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as her case moved through official channels, but for the first time in 3 years, she was facing the future as Elena Vasquez, rather than hiding behind the fiction of Sarah Martinez. Her phone rang as she was preparing dinner, and Sarah was surprised to see Jensen's number on the caller ID. She answered with curiosity about what had prompted his call. "Elena, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Jensen said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been present in their previous interactions. "Not at all. What's on your mind?" Jensen paused, then spoke with obvious sincerity. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did today. But I also wanted you to know that several of us have been talking, and we hope you'll consider staying here permanently when your status gets sorted out." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for the acceptance and support she was receiving from Marines who had every right to feel deceived by her 3-year masquerade. "That means everything to me, Jensen. I hope it works out that way too. One more thing," Jensen continued. "That rifle you repaired is still shooting better than anything we've ever had. If you're willing, we'd love to have you work with our marksmanship team. Not just repairing equipment, but actually helping with training and technique development." The invitation represented exactly the kind of contribution Sarah had dreamed of making during her years of forced exile. The opportunity to use her skills to help other Marines improve their capabilities was more meaningful than any formal recognition or restored rank. "I would be honored to help in any way I can," Sarah replied. Sharing knowledge and helping Marines excel at their mission is what being part of the Corps is all about. After ending the call, Sarah stood in her apartment looking at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. For the first time in 3 years, she saw Elena Vasquez looking back at her. The woman who had been hidden beneath the careful facade of civilian normalcy was finally free to emerge, to contribute her skills and experience without apology or concealment. Sarah understood that challenges lay ahead. The process of restoring her military status would be complex and potentially contentious. There would be questions about the classified mission that had led to her disappearance, investigations into her activities during the intervening years, and decisions about how to handle the precedent her case might set for other situations involving erased personnel. But for the first time since her supposed death in the mountains of Afghanistan, Elena Vasquez was optimistic about the future. She had proven that her skills and dedication remained sharp despite years of suppression. She had demonstrated that her commitment to protecting Marines transcended personal risk or career considerations, and she had found acceptance among the people whose respect mattered most to her. The next morning, Sarah reported to the motor pool with a sense of purpose that had been absent from her routine for 3 years. She was still assigned to mechanical duties pending the resolution of her status review, but now she worked openly, as someone whose knowledge and capabilities were acknowledged and valued. Word of her actions had spread throughout the base, and Sarah found herself receiving respectful nods and words of appreciation from Marines she had never formally met. The story of the civilian mechanic who had turned out to be an elite sniper had become part of base folklore, but more importantly, it had established her credibility and earned her the respect of the Marine community. Rodriguez approached her workstation with an assignment that reflected the new reality of her situation. "Vasquez, I know you're technically still civilian personnel, but Colonel Patterson has asked me to include you in the planning for next month's training exercise. We could use someone with your tactical experience to help design realistic scenarios." Sarah accepted the assignment with genuine enthusiasm. The opportunity to contribute her knowledge to training that would improve Marine readiness was exactly the kind of meaningful work she had missed during her years of exile. "I'd be happy to help with the planning, Sergeant Rodriguez. Training that challenges Marines and prepares them for real-world situations is some of the most important work we can do." As Sarah began reviewing the training scenarios and operational parameters, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, Elena Vasquez had been declared dead to protect classified information and political interests. Today, she was alive, acknowledged, and contributing to the mission she had always been trained to support. The transformation from Sarah Martinez back to Elena Vasquez represented more than just a change in identity. It was a return to authenticity, a restoration of purpose, and a reconnection with the values and community that had always defined her sense of self. Sarah understood that she would always carry the memory of her years in exile, the loneliness of maintaining a false identity, and the weight of secrets that could never be fully shared. But she also carried the knowledge that when the moment of truth had arrived, she had chosen to act according to her deepest convictions rather than her immediate self-interest. Elena Vasquez was home, not just physically but spiritually and professionally. She was once again part of the Marine Corps' family, contributing her skills to protect and serve the people who shared her commitment to excellence and service. The mechanic had revealed the sniper, but more importantly, the Marine had reclaimed her place among Marines. As Sarah worked on the training scenarios, planning challenges that would test and improve the capabilities of the Marines who would participate, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from using her knowledge and experience in service of something larger than herself. This was who she had always been meant to be, and this was the work she had always been meant to do. The phone call came 3 weeks later. Colonel Patterson's voice was formal, but carried an undertone of satisfaction that suggested positive news. Sarah was requested to report to his office for a discussion of her case review results. Sarah entered Patterson's office with the bearing and confidence of a Marine reporting for duty. The past 3 weeks had been productive and fulfilling. Working openly with her colleagues on training development and equipment improvement projects, she had found her place within the base community and had contributed meaningfully to mission readiness. Patterson gestured for her to take a seat, then opened a folder containing official correspondence with military letterhead and formal formatting. "Vasquez, I have news about your status review. Higher headquarters has completed their investigation and reached a decision about your case." Sarah maintained her composure while internally preparing for whatever outcome the review had produced. She had hoped for the best while understanding that bureaucratic and political considerations might override the practical arguments for her restoration. "Sir, I'm ready to hear the results." Patterson's expression shifted to one of genuine satisfaction. "Elena Vasquez, you are hereby notified that your death declaration has been officially rescinded. Your military record is being restored, your rank and benefits are being reinstated, and you are being offered the opportunity to return to active duty with full honors." Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she struggled to control. The news represented vindication, restoration, and the return of everything she had lost 3 years ago. But more than that, it represented acknowledgement that Elena Vasquez had always been who she claimed to be. "Sir, I accept the offer to return to active duty. Thank you for advocating for this outcome." Patterson smiled, extending his hand in congratulation. "Vasquez, you earned this outcome through your actions, your service, and your character. The Marine Corps is better for having you back." As Sarah left Patterson's office with orders to report for processing and reintegration, she reflected on the remarkable journey from exile to restoration. She had spent 3 years as Sarah Martinez, hiding her true identity and suppressing her capabilities. But when the moment of truth had arrived, Elena Vasquez had emerged to do what Marines do: protect others and accomplish the mission. Base looked exactly the same as it had that morning when emergency alarms had shattered her routine. But everything had changed. Sarah Martinez had been a fiction, a necessary deception that had served its purpose. Elena Vasquez was real, acknowledged, and home where she belonged. Walking across the base where she had worked in anonymity for 3 years, now wearing her uniform and rank with pride, Elena reflected on the lessons learned during her time in exile. She had discovered that identity wasn't just about official recognition or documented status. It was about character, values, and the choices made when everything was at stake. Elena Vasquez had never really died in the mountains of Afghanistan. She had been hidden, suppressed, and officially erased, but she had always been there, waiting for the moment when duty would call her back to service. That moment had come in the form of an emergency that required her to choose between safety and service, between concealment and courage. She had chosen to be a Marine, and the Marine Corps had chosen to welcome her home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.